Our keynote speaker is a Fellow of the Academy of Social Sciences. She is Professor of Education at the University of Southampton, and Director of the Centre for Research in Inclusion. Our speaker is one of the co-directors of the National Centre for Research Methods, leading research on the pedagogy of research methods learning and methodological responses to researching in the pandemic. She edits the Bloomsbury Research Methods for Education book series and British Journal of Learning Disabilities. She is also past editor of International Journal of Research and Method in Education. The title of her presentation is Rigor in Online Qualitative Research. Through the Lens of COVID-19 Times. Let's welcome our keynote speaker, Melanie Nind, PhD.
Thank you. I've never been introduced by video before. That was lovely. Can people hear me? I'm just going to remove the chat and see if I can share my screen effectively with you. Bear with me, it always takes a moment. Okay, so hopefully you can see my screen and see me and hear me.
Yes, we can.
Oh, thank you. It's lovely when you hear a little reassuring voice to say. So it's lovely to be joining you from over here in England. I'm at home in Bournemouth, which is on the south coast of England, but my mind and my heart is with you in the Philippines and Asia, wherever you may be. And it's an honor to have been invited to do the opening keynote for your conference. I'm a good friend of AQRA and applaud what you're doing there. So as the introduction said, I'm a professor in education, Melanie Nind, and I come at this from my role in the National Centre for Research Methods, which is a research council funded big investment in the UK, and our mission is to increase capacity and quality in research. So we cover all kinds of research, but I'm a qualitative researcher through and through to my bones. And I was invited by our funding council to lead a new project last year when the world went into turmoil with COVID-19 pandemic. The Research Council came to me and said, can you do something about what's happening to social research in the pandemic? We're aware this isn't just a medical phenomenon, this is a social phenomenon, and how are social researchers coping and how can we help them to cope? So since June 2020, I've been conducting research on the social research response to COVID-19. And it's through that lens, really, that I reflect with you today on rigor in online qualitative research. I can see I'm going to need my water today. So my kind of keynote in a nutshell is that rigor in online qualitative research is the same as rigor in all qualitative research, but different. Okay, so there's so much of what we're talking about today is just about rigor in research. And when I say the same, I mean the same as rigor in qualitative research. I don't mean the rigor the same as in quantitative research, which I'm sure you're aware is quite different, kind of our standards and expectations and mindset. So let's just reflect back. I was with you a year ago in AQRA talking about quality in research and talking about how do we know when qualitative research is done well. And I'm just sharing with you now, just to recap and get our minds into that same space. We know when qualitative research is done well, when it follows some standards for qualitative research, when we have transparency, authenticity, credibility, when we can see that findings are reported in a fair and reasonable manner, when we can see that participants have been asked open, clear questions, and when the conclusions of that research follow on clearly and logically from the research question that was asked. And I've taken these from guidance for peer review for journals. So these are accepted kind of ideas about knowing when qualitative research has done well. And what I'm going to do repeatedly through my presentation is keep coming back to quality, and I'll tell you why in a moment. So if we just set aside for a moment the whole thing about online research and just think qualitative research, these criteria, quality criteria, come from Mays and Pope, and they've stood up well over 2 decades of our understanding of what good qualitative research is. So we have this relationship with theory, often producing theory. We have this need to be credible so that participants recognize the research accounts, readers find the research account credible, that we've got this rich description of cultural and contextual features. We have real researcher reflexivity, critically reflecting on our role as researchers in the research process. And here's that word, rigor. We have rigor, evidence of searching for, discussing, counter evidence, exceptional patterns in the data. So this is about not just finding what you thought you were going to find and hoped that you would find, but looking for counter evidence. Transparency, and the possibility of theoretically applying what we learn to new contexts. So I want us to keep these kinds of ideas in the backs of our minds as we go through this time together today. So I said that I wanted to position our discussion of rigor within a wider circle, within a wider discussion of quality. And this is how I see rigor, positioned within our concerns with quality in our research. And I note that quality is part of your mission statement in AQRA. But I would almost take away some of the boundaries there and make the edges a bit blurrier. So if we see this big thing of quality, we see rigor, and for me, ethics is in there as well at the heart of quality. So if we think about now the new challenge in a pandemic era, when the world is just so different to how it was 18 months ago, I would argue that none of the core things have changed. That all of those quality criteria, when we submit our articles to journals, none of that is different. But what we're faced with is this new challenge, of knowing when qualitative research is done well, including, and this is really important, when researchers have moved rapidly to online research. So I think when people have been doing online research carefully, meticulously for years, there isn't this big kind of question, is it rigorous? Because that's very clear in the processes. But that can be quite different for researchers, and I suspect there are many here today in this virtual room who have moved very rapidly to online research because we've had to, and I count myself as one of those. So this lens that I'm looking at, I include myself in. When we were asked to do research on what's happening to social research in COVID times, I had to move to being an online researcher to be able to carry out that research. So I'm deep in this. So this is what the next section is about, really, this rapid move to online methods. And I position everything I say from my stance within this research project. So the project is called Changing Research Practices for COVID-19. We're currently on our third phase of funding. So initially we were funded for the urgent, what's going on, what's out there, how can we help researchers? That was the first 6 months. And then it was, can you do some more? Those resources were very, very helpful. We need to keep this conversation going. And now in our third phase of this research project, we're looking more at the long term and the deeper learning and the relationship between uncertainty and research methods. So what happens to research methods and practices in an uncertain world? And that, of course, includes doing research online. So there's a link here to the website, and I hope you'd follow that up perhaps later. And at this point, I should acknowledge my two wonderful co-researchers, Robert Meckin and Andy Coverdale, who are doing this research project with me. And it is absolutely fascinating, absolutely. Okay, so this is what we've been up to so far. We've been engaged in looking at the discussion that happened, because we came to the party a little late in June 2020. Work was already going on in social media, in blogs. Some of you may have seen Deborah Lupton's doing field work in a pandemic, which was a co-produced kind of collaborative response to the pandemic for social researchers. So we've been looking at what's out there in the grey literature. And we've been stimulating discussion as well. Our overall intention is to kind of be the go-to place for people concerned with research in the pandemic. So we've held 11 virtual knowledge exchange workshops and 2 big webinars, sharing the challenges and lessons of social research rapidly adapting to COVID-19 times. And another strand of this research has been a rapid evidence review. In 2020, it was a rapid evidence review. In 2021, it's been more of a standard systematic review, looking at the literature out there on what's happening to methods, including very, very largely the move to online. And we've been sharing lots of guidance material around all of this. And some of what I say today comes from that guidance material. So at this point in my lecture, I can hear Kathy Sharmas, the dear departed Kathy Sharmas, who was one of my mentors in becoming a qualitative researcher. And I can hear her voice in my head saying, but context is everything, Mel. Context is everything in qualitative research. So when we reflect together on rigor, we have to think of the context that we're working in, this huge rise in interaction in online spaces. That hasn't just been the research world, that's been for everyone. We're all in this rise in being in online spaces. We've all been learning and adapting fast, not just researchers. My neighbours with their children, my elderly neighbours trying to get to grips with Zoom, everybody's learning. Universities have been supporting us, but our experience in England, and I'm interested to hear if it's the same for you, is that universities have been much more quick to support us with our online teaching than they have with our online research. So there's been a gap there that the National Centre has been trying to fill. We've seen the advent of Zoom fatigue or tech fatigue. This wasn't a thing 18 months ago, I think, but it's very much a thing now. And so when we consider rigor in online research, the context is that we need to consider the onlineification of everything. And I love this phrase. It came from one of the papers that we came across in our systematic review, the onlineification of everything. That is the context that we are within now. So what we've learned so far from our research project, and we've learned many more things than this, but it kind of sums up some nubs of it, that social researchers have been substituting methods or combining them in new ways. We've learned that some methods have actually flourished in COVID times while others have stalled. And it's interesting that flourishing methods have often been qualitative ones: autoethnography, expressive methods, artistic creative methods, diary methods. These have been particularly well suited to pandemic conditions when we're moved to try to write it down or mark it in some way and share our sense of reality with others, as part of our coping with a period of huge change and uncertainty and grief and loss, I have to say. And researchers have also adapted their methods for use in online and distant ways. So we see these shifting patterns. And so if we start off talking about the onlineification of research, with the online substitutes, there has been this recurring pattern, swapping an in-person interview for an online interview, swapping an in-person focus group for an online one, switching our discussions and research meetings to online formats. And what we have to remember, of course, is that none of this is without consequence in terms of rigor. How did that switch happen? How rapidly did it happen? How well was that switch planned? What are the affordances of the online substitute platform or teleconferencing tool that we have switched to? So this all has implications for rigor. If we think of hybrid or combinations of methods, these have flourished in COVID times, and just fascinating. NCRM is interested always in methodological innovation, and we've seen some really interesting things going on here. For our Research Methods Festival that we hold in the centre, we've invited Natalie Sherrick and colleagues to talk about their reimagining in situ methods for online times. And they are health researchers and geographers who are interested in methods where people are in their situation. So like walking methods, walking along by the river, walking through tree-lined avenues on campus as you do your interviews or your other methods. And they've worked on how we reimagine those for COVID times. So people have been going on walks with a chest camera or a handheld camera, talking about and recording what's been going on. And that has been live streamed to researchers in an office who've been able to give them prompts or share with them. We've seen cultural probe methods adapted. So instead of the probe being there in the room with you, posted into people's homes, all kinds of adaptations. So there's a bit of hybridization of methods going on. And rigor here is really important again. Where we see the rigor here is seeking to retain what matters, keeping the research participants leading the research and the dialogue open. Thirdly, when we think about the onlineification of research, and we think about online adaptations, there is so much detail in this. And my role today isn't to go through the detail with you, it's to open your minds to possibilities a bit more, I think. But I would really flag for you Poppy Gerard-Abbott's online lecture, and you've got the link here for the detail. Poppy was a participant in our research, and so she shared a lot of what she'd learned through doing online focus groups in her research, which is about gender-based violence. But you know, she stresses, and we would stress, that in adapting our methods to become online, we have to ask ourselves two key questions at the moment. Is this still the best method for my research question? And if it's still the best method, how do I adapt it for online? And does it fit with how COVID-19 is impacting my participants? Not how it's impacting on me as a researcher, but how my participants' lives are now. So this is about how careful and sensitive is the adaptation. So this is just a slide from Poppy's YouTube video that you can watch. And she reminds us that digital is often more work than online research. It takes more prep. It takes more a kind of being alert to everything going on. The ethical risks can be different and higher. The chairing, as people here probably find, is more complex. Recruitment for online research can be more challenging. It can be difficult to keep this picture of it. And so self-motivation is really required when we're not there side by side, keeping each other going through the research. Poppy has a very useful checklist, and I would encourage people to kind of think in this way: before, during, after. What do I need to think about in my online research? What are all the things I need to be careful about before, during, and after? I think that's a useful tool. And I'm not going to fill in the blanks for you here and now. We don't have the time for that. So if we think about conducting research online, we can see a really good example in online ethnographies. And we've had an online ethnography for a long time now. And this is because ethnography is built for change, because it's about responding to cultures and tuning into cultures. Ethnography has become blended and digital. And we can find new ways to be in the field. And we can find new ways of adapting and being with digital objects. I've just got to let my cat out of the room, otherwise you're going to hear cat wailing all through this. Excuse me. I didn't plant that to happen, but it's one of the things that happens in online research, isn't it? We are in the room with people, we're in people's homes and lives. But the rigor point here is that when we did traditional ethnographies, we would sought to be there in physical proximity, but we also sought to be with people in emotional proximity, and they're not the same thing. But when we are researching online and at a distance, we may not be there physically, as I'm not there physically with you now, but I can be with you emotionally. And this is a really good concept, I think, for us to keep with us. And we have from our project a series of NCRM wayfinder guides, helping to find your way through research in the pandemic. And we have one to conducting ethnographic research in COVID times. And this is very good on these issues. So a drawing. It's lovely to be able to share data, isn't it? And if I'm talking to you about online research, I can share with you some data from our research project, which was about, as I say, doing research in COVID times. And one of the things we asked people to bring to our knowledge exchange workshops, which were held online on Zoom, was a sketch of how their research has changed and adapted during COVID, and to use the metaphor, the visual metaphor of a river. I'm passionate about metaphors in research. I think they're such a valuable research tool. And this is one of the river sketches, and it's very pertinent to what we're talking about today. And I just love its simplicity and clarity. So, and it's no accident that I bring it in now, because the sketch was done by Professor Christine Hine, who wrote online ethnography years ago, and he's an absolute expert on online methods. And she sketched her picture of life in the pandemic using a river metaphor as her being the PGR director, the director of postgraduate research in her university. And she's positioned herself on the riverbank, holding her banner that says, "Go for it." This is back in February 2020. And her doctoral researchers are in their little boats, paddling along in the river of their research. And then COVID strikes, and we can see some of those researchers in the water. One has made it to the banks, but they're in distress in the water. And then in April, we see Christine as her role as this director on the riverbank with her life belt or life buoy that says online methods. And she's going to throw it out to her research students. But the message with it is, use with caution. And I love this. This is just a metaphor for everything I'm going to say today. Online methods are a lifesaver for us in keeping our research going at this time, but we have to use them with caution. So back to Rigour. I haven't left Rigour really, but Rigour is more at the forefront here. For me, Rigour is about being thorough and taking care. And these are part of dictionary definitions, of course, as well. Being thorough, taking care. So we can think about careful research in the normal word, careful, but I also think of this here as careful, full of care research. To be rigorous online, we need to be full of care. And this means, and I've got different steps here. Firstly, careful decision making. How much change is needed to the research designer's method as we move online? You know, this is a real big decision. First of all, how much do I need to change it? How much of my original research design can I retain? Which platform best meets my needs? And critically, how will I keep the data secure? So careful decision making. And then we have careful modification and reflection of methods. How can we bring in digital social networks and use them wisely? Many of the papers that we read as part of the systematic review process were about recruitment, the challenges of recruiting participants online, and the use of Facebook and other networks for doing that job for us. But we have to do that with such care. Reflecting on the impact of participants, you know, that how they access their methods. So one wonderful paper we had talked about when a family, and it was family-based interviews, were clustered around one iPad compared to when each family member was holding their own iPad, and what difference that digital interaction had for how the focus group continued. So, you know, real reflection on this method, and the small things matter in qualitative research, don't they? Big things as well, reflecting on who online methods suit and who they don't. I was fortunate, my research during COVID was with academics, and they could, you know, convert with me to online methods very readily. For people doing research with other groups, it's less straightforward. Some of my other research has been about doing research, it's been about life as somebody with learning disabilities, intellectual disability. And for those participants, learning to use Zoom was a very different thing. but they did it, and we carried on working together online. And reflecting on how to make the online world accessible to those who are digitally excluded. This is such a big issue that we have to be so reflexive about. We can't just keep our research going happily and not think about all those people who we're leaving behind. Careful research involves careful attention to new possibilities. This is critical, of course. The move to online hasn't just been about closing down, it's been about opening up new avenues, being able to explore the affordances in different ways, thinking about how geographically our research can be bigger than it was, because we can include people from all over the country now. But is that wise? Do we want to? Does that lose some of the intimacy and focus? What new insights do we gain? One of our participants in the knowledge exchange workshops talked about she was doing research with teachers, interviewing them before the pandemic hit, and she was interviewing them in person in schools. And then after lockdowns, she was interviewing them on Zoom, and they were in their own homes. And she's really had to reflect on how being an interviewee, talking from your own home, makes you more candid, makes the data richer. So there are new insights. You know, often research is just different. It's probably not better or worse, but it's different data, and we need to reflect on those differences. And of course, our good old friend ethics. Rigor and careful research online means careful attention to ethics. How do we build relationships and rapport online? You know, how can we use chat and WhatsApp messaging to create intimacy, to get to know our participants? How can we build trust online when there are fewer cues? I'm now talking to an image of myself talking and to my slides, and I look to myself for encouragement. So there are different cues, different dynamics to this research. How do we provide comfort to participants in distress? You know, we've got to attend to this. What happens if somebody gets upset and you're, you know, across the world? You can't pass them a tissue and make them a cup of tea. Some of our researchers who've joined us in the knowledge exchange workshops have said they've set aside breakout rooms with a counsellor or a friendly face in the breakout room, so you can move a participant to a breakout room. Fabulous. I wouldn't have thought of that, but you know, our job is to share these good messages. Respecting social media's expectations of privacy, of course. We can't become the kind of qualitative researcher that just goes around scraping data instead. We don't want to lose our integrity as qualitative researchers. And the big ethical question is always now, is it ethical to be conducting this research at this terrible time? Is it still a priority when people are worried about so much more in their lives? Okay, just a word on validity. It's part of the big quality kind of quality rigor ethics combination. We need to give careful attention to the mode effects in switching to online. So, you know, this is the thing about when we were in person and then we switched to online, that's a mode change. The survey researchers are very, very interested in the effects of mode switch at the moment. But I think as qualitative researchers as well, we need to ask ourselves how much of this data reflects the mode and how much reflects the topic. How can we attend to the difference in moving from paper materials to digital materials, does that affect the topic? Does that affect the data, our findings? Are our findings a feature of the material in that way? And we know, don't we, as qualitative researchers, that how we research affects what we find. And if the world is no longer the same as it was 18 months ago, or even yesterday, you know, how does that affect our data? This is all part of being rigorous. And I'm pleased to say that you can read about all of this in our reports from our projects. We've got the evidence review report and the general report that you can access online in these wonderful times. This is our website and our resources tab. You can see we have many wayfinder guides there to assist people. And so to my conclusion, I was just glancing at my watch to see that I've left time for some discussion or questions, and I think I have, but I want to leave you with some concluding thoughts, and it's just one slide here. When thinking about rigor and ethics as integral to quality, think about my picture when we're doing our qualitative research online. We need to retain our qualitative standpoint. We mustn't lose sight of our qualitative sensibility. And this is really important. Let's not lose what makes our research qualitatively rich. We need to remember that context is everything. Thank you, Kathy Sharmas, when we're researching online. And that means being sensitive to the way the context is different. Your context listening to this, maybe with a cat in the room, children at your knee, movement in other bits of the room. We need to tune into that context. We need to be aware that participants may not have privacy when we're talking to them in our research now. In the rush to online methods, and it was a rush in the beginning, we need to picture not just Kathy Sharmas saying context is everything, but we need to picture Christine Hine with her life buoy saying, use online methods with caution. Keep cautious, keep careful. We need to beware rapid quals. Rapid surveys are one thing, rapid quals are another. Qualitative research requires us to take time to do our research analysis carefully and to live with that data, immerse ourselves in that data. So we have to beware rapid quals, I think. And my take-home message for you is long live careful practices. Thank you.
Wow. Thank you so much, Dr. Need. It's always enriching to listen to you present on qualitative research. Thank you so much. We will spend some time to engage you with some form of feedback, and I would like to know if there are any questions. And besides, before I even ask for questions, those that can, please do a reaction on your at the bottom of your Zoom, just a reaction and clap, or even in the chat. I mean, this was a wonderful opening discussion. So are we having any questions? Dr. Grace, do you have any questions? While we're looking for questions, Prof. Nim, oh, by the way, I also would like to invite you. I mean, Prof. Nim just made an invitation to the website. Great things are happening on their website, and there is a great, again, research. You call that the e-festival methods. I'm actually speaking on that. So I want to invite a lot of you to go there and check what's happening. Prof. Nim, with regard to rigor online, you said that we need to be careful. There's a whole lot of debate, obviously, with regard to ethics on tools. Would you recommend specific tools that have to be used when one ensures that carefulness? For instance, with WhatsApp, sometimes information might leak, not to mention what happened recently when Facebook and WhatsApp was off. But would you recommend some strategies? How careful can researchers who depend on these digital platforms, how careful can they be?
Yeah, this is a very difficult issue, and we're aware of it. And one of our first instincts was to provide guidance for people in our guidance materials on the website for which platform offers which kinds of security in which ways, so that we could be a go-to place for people saying, you know, how can I make sure I'm, you know, got a data secure website and stuff. But we soon realized that was impossible because the field is too fast moving. So when we started our project, Zoom was a no-no. Our university would not give ethics permission to use Zoom for research. Because their data security wasn't good enough. And of course, Zoom responded and started improving its data security. So another platform started trying to make it even better. You know, market forces didn't go away in COVID. These people are making their money. But it's actually so fast moving that I don't think it's right and fair for an outside party to try to give guidance. What we need to do is to say that the ethics committees need to keep on top of this if they can, but the individual researchers need to take responsibility to go to that and say, what are they offering today? Because something published 3 weeks ago won't be up to date. And the other thing I would say about that is, you know, it's not just about privacy, it's about bandwidth. Our university spent a lot of time saying, use Microsoft Teams, you know, this is secure. And all our researchers in the UK whose research was in the global south were saying, this is rubbish. Teams takes much, much more bandwidth. So that's no good for people in the global south. So, you know, I can't give people the answers, I'm afraid.
Wow. We've got a question here. Prema asked a question with regard to building rapport with the participants. And I don't know whether it's a she or not. I don't know, because I can't identify the name, whether it's a male or a female. But Prema would like to know, for instance, how best could we keep quality and while we ensure rapport using the digital platforms?
I think it's all of those things I've been saying. I think if you're on the digital platform, there are some exercises that we can do as qualitative researchers to make ourselves better. One of the ones we did in some of our teaching I've done for NCRM with people who are teaching on teaching online is we had everybody together on gallery view, so with their cameras on, so that we could see everybody in the platform. And we tried to count from 1 to 10, where each person has to say a different number, but you don't know which number you're saying, and you mustn't talk over each other. So if I said 1, you might say 2, Arceli might say 3. And it takes lots and lots and lots of attempts to get to 10 without talking over each other. But when you practice, you learn to tune out the sound of the washing machine and the things going on in your home, and really attend to the people on your screen in a way that you do when you're in person, because it's about being in the moment and being with those people on the screen. So I think we can enhance the quality of our data by learning to tune in online. We're used to being online and multitasking. I don't know about you, but I go lots of meetings now and do my email at the same time. We can't be in that frame of mind when we're a researcher. A qualitative researcher has to be in that moment. Yeah.
Because perhaps the participants might realize that you're not paying too much attention to them. Here's another question again from Bangula. Bangula would like to know, for instance, how would you deal with a situation where you ask sensitive questions? I mean, COVID-19 locked all of us in our homes for a very long time. And so we all went through things, and you could be asking certain questions that are sensitive, and this person is breaking up in their own space. How do you deal? They're crying, they become emotional. How would you handle that?
Yeah, I think
without
it's that
being with them, and you're on a digital space.
Yeah. As I said, you can't make them a cup of tea, you can't give them a tissue, but you can be with, you can acknowledge how you're feeling. I can see this is emotional for you. I can see this is difficult. Take a moment. You know, you've got to use the tools that you've got there, and you've still got your voice, your face. You can give people permission to, would you like to turn your camera off for a while? Would you like to leave and come back? All, you know, we've got skills that we developed in our in-person research. We just have to apply those to a different context. So it's about thinking through, what would I do? How can I do it? I remember when we were talking in another NCRM project with doctoral researchers about how do they learn the craft. And they said, you've not learned to be an interviewer until you've been in an interview, when your interviewee breaks down in tears. You know, that's when you learn to be an interviewer, because you learn through experience. So online, we face difficult circumstances and we work our way through them. And afterwards, we have reflexivity. We have that moment of, oh, how well did I do? What would I do different next time? What did that do to me? Am I okay? Because there's lots of looking after ourselves in this. One of our participants in our project said, as a researcher, they thought, oh, goody, I can fit in 8 hour-long Zoom interviews in a day now. It's online. There's no traveling. I'll just do them back to back and fit them in. And she was just exhausted and poorly, because it takes it out of us. We have to look after ourselves as well if we're going to be rigorous, careful online researchers.
Wow, thank you, Dr. Need. Again, I must say it's really been an enriching session, and we just started on a great note with you. Thank you so much. Unfortunately, I'm running out of the time that we have. So what we are going to do now, I see there's many questions in the chat. We will try and get these questions, and AQRA will see how the participants get some form of responses. And perhaps these will also be addressed, going forward. Now, I would like to do the honors on behalf of the Asian Qualitative Research Association. I would love to put up, there's a certificate there. We are honoring you, and we are thanking you so much for opening and honoring our conference, and we are presenting to you the certificate of recognition. Thank you, Dr. Melanie Need.
Thank you. It was an honor to open the conference, and I hope it goes really well. I'm sure it will. Thank you.